You think that the Israelis are not going to pay a very expensive price? The killing is not accidental either. He could be the Nelson Mandela of the Palestinians.
Trump is picking people in his administration who are saying things that Smotrich and Ben Gvir says. We will take the West Bank, we will finish them, we will complete the mission.
Now, there is a political persecution in Israel. That's part of turning Israel into as I said before, a full-fledged fascist dictatorship. Shame. I'm ashamed. This is my country. Israel is my country.
Just tell me again, or tell our audience, just how do you feel about everything you've seen?
40 villages were wiped out of earth in Lebanon, in South Lebanon. 40 villages. Let's not forget Lebanon. He doesn't, and they don't. We need peace of the brave ones. And it's true. Now, among the Palestinians, there are some brave ones. In Israel, there are either bigots, fanatics, sometimes murderous ones. That was brilliant. It passed very fast.
Yeah, it was. Hi, good day and welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. I'm your host, Ashfaaq Carim, and with me today is a member of the Israeli Knesset, Offer Cassif. I say you're a member of the Israeli Knesset, but at the moment you're suspended.
I am suspended. I can vote, but apart from that, I am not eligible to do anything in the next 6 months.
Offer Cassif was on our show before. He's been here about 5 months ago. Today we're going to be discussing a lot of things. Arrest warrant has just been issued for Gantz and for Netanyahu. We'll speak about that. We'll speak about the continuous slide of Israeli society into fascism. We'll speak about your suspension and what brought about that. And we'll also speak about how Israel can possibly, if it can, bring itself back from a brink of a point which I think you'll agree is almost a point of no return, and what justice for Palestinians look like in the midst of this genocide. So just first things first, you obviously spent a year trying to raise your voice in the Knesset and elsewhere. You've been, I remember from our previous conversation, you've been disgusted by what you've seen, by Israeli soldiers, by settlers stopping aid from going into Gaza. There's even been protests in support of rape of Palestinian prisoners. Just tell me again, or tell our audience, just how do you feel about everything you've seen?
First of all, I'm in pain to see thousands and thousands of people butchered. Innocent civilians, more than 70% of the Palestinians in Gaza who've been killed by Israel are innocent civilians that have had nothing to do with Hamas or with battle of any kind. Many children, almost 20,000 children. And I'm afraid that the death toll is much higher, and we see it in the future because people are still starved and prevented from getting medicine and humanitarian aid and water and any basic human conditions. I would say even animals do not live under such duress. So I'm first and foremost in pain because when I see human being, suffer in such a way, so it doesn't matter for me who that human being is. I cannot tolerate such a thing, especially children, but in general. I consider myself as a humanistic. And that's the reason I'm communist, because I see the two are interconnected. And I cannot stand it. By the way, I have a personal, issue as well, because the whole family of my grandparents on my mother's side were murdered by the Nazis, and this is something that I think about a lot. What could have happened had people raised their voices much, earlier and louder before the systematic industrial, as it were, killing began of Jews mainly and others under the Nazi occupation and rule. That is something which accompanies me throughout my adult lives in my political activities. So first of all, it's pain, shame. I'm ashamed. This is my country. Israel is my country. And to see that my country has been launching such a vicious genocide, atrocities, crimes against humanity, war crimes, in addition to the pain I feel, I'm ashamed. And rage. Now that has nothing to do with my total pain, rage, and anger at what Hamas did. People must understand that those two are not mutually exclusive. One of the problems is that in Israel, once you are against the atrocities that Israel is committing, you are immediately and automatically identified as pro-Hamas, as if you supported, what Hamas did. Absolutely not. To be humanistic, as I consider myself, is to fight for all human beings. And obviously, injustice is universal. And as a, byproduct of that, obviously, my struggle is for justice for both Palestinians and Israelis, like any other human being. But my rage and disgust and pain at the massacre committed by Hamas, in which, by the way, I lost some friends, doesn't exclude my pain, rage, shame, and disgust at what Israel has been doing in the last year.
You mentioned that there's an industrial scale of killing when you spoke about the Nazis and your family. Do you think the onslaught on Gaza is sort of reaching an industrial scale? What's your thoughts on that?
No, I cannot say something like that. I mean, we cannot, there are no, death camps or, gas chambers or something alike that you can refer to as industrial, systematic, predetermined killing. But that's bad enough. I do not make the comparison between the Holocaust of the Jewish Holocaust and the current carnage and genocide of Palestinians, like I do not make a comparison with, for instance, the Armenian genocide or whatever, because there are similarities, but there are many differences. So I do not make the comparison, but the situation is grave enough. I mean, there is a killing, a planned killing of Palestinians. It is indeed not industrial, it is not systematic like it was in the Holocaust, but the killing is not accidental either. And by the way, as opposed to the formal statements of Israeli politicians and generals a few months ago, in which they were determined to deny that there is a planned and a willful killing, now they even do not, deny it. Sometimes, marginally, they do, but they don't really deny it now. And sometimes they're even proud of it. You can see videos of soldiers on the ground pursuing war crimes, videoing themselves, and publish it in the social network. They are not even ashamed. They think they're doing the right thing. That's disgusting and cannot be tolerated, to say the least. But I do not make the comparison with the Holocaust, and I hope that I won't need to make one.
We'll speak a bit more about this later on as well. But you mentioned there's a planned killing. You are in the Knesset. You obviously know many of the people who are, what you're saying is making a plan, right? Walk us through their thinking. Just walk us through what their strategy is. What is this plan from what you can see? That's often unspoken, but maybe is a subtext of the environment that you've been a part of for as long as you've been a politician.
Well, exactly 1 year ago, it was, I guess, something like 2 or 3 weeks after the massacre committed by Hamas. I was interviewed, I think it was in an American television show, something like that, or radio, I don't remember exactly. But then I said that the government of Israel wanted an eruption of violence. I didn't say, and I don't say that it was interested in such a level or such a, death toll and what happened, but the government did want some eruption. And I explained why. And I think, and allow me, I'm sorry if it sounds as if I'm flattering myself, but I think it seems that I was totally correct, although I said that over a year ago. And what I meant is, in 2017, Bezalel Smotrich, who then was a backbencher, but now is the Minister of Finance and also a minister within the Ministry of Defense, published publicly, you can even find it in English on the internet, the so-called decisive plan or subjugation plan. And this plan has basically 3 main elements. First, he called upon the Israeli government to annex the all occupied Palestinian territories without, of course, granting basic rights to the Palestinians. That means, of course, official apartheid, because practically it exists already. The second point was that those Palestinians who are not going to accept their status as subjects rather than citizens are going to be expelled from their homeland. And the third point was, although implicitly, but very clearly, that those who are going to resist are going to be killed. Now, what I said 1 year ago, as I said 2 or 3 weeks after the massacre by Hamas, is that the government of Israel wants to use the crimes committed by Hamas as an excuse to pursue with the very same plan, that decisive plan. to use the smokescreen and to use it as an excuse to pursue with the very same plan. The government already began to realize that plan by the so-called judicial reform, which was actually a sugar-coated term of a coup d'etat that the government began to pursue before October 7th. This coup was, which is still on, perhaps we talk about it later, this coup was intended not only to turn Israel into a fascist regime and even fascist society by persecuting political opponents of the government, silencing of the opposition, the real opposition, etc. But that was the means. The end of this coup was to eliminate those factors that can block the decisive plan. That is independent judiciary, independent media, public opinion, etc. Limiting or even abolishing the right to demonstrate, to strike, etc., etc. That it was actually the attempt of the government then. But all those were not only ends in themselves, but also means to realize the decisive plan. In the last year, we see that this is exactly what I said 1 year ago. What they've been doing now, the government, and unfortunately, part of the opposition in the parliament support them, is exactly that. They are pursuing a genocide, an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank as well, massacre and destruction in Lebanon, and turning Israel into a full-fledged fascist regime. That's exactly what they've been doing. The plan, eventually, is the decisive plan. And if genocide is part of the realization, as I stressed what was the third point of the decisive plan, so be it as far as they are concerned. I think that's the essence of the issue.
So just to be clear, when you talk about making Palestinians officially subjects or second-class citizens, you mean in what is considered Greater Israel, Palestine, everything, the Jordan Valley, the West Bank, Israel and Gaza, not just what's
in
currently.
Israel. It's a bit different. I mean, because the Palestinians under the siege in Gaza before the genocide began, and under the occupation in the West Bank, including, of course, East Jerusalem, they've never been really citizens, ever.
Yep.
I mean, they do not have basic rights, of course, not to be elected and vote, but some other, like freedom of movement, of association, of speech, etc. They do not. The Palestinian citizens in Israel, which constitute about 21% of the citizenry, they do have the formal rights to vote and be elected, freedom of speech, etc., formally, far from being equal. But now, one of the bills that the government, with support from some segments of the opposition, pursue, there's a list of more than 100 bills and laws that already passed, which are intending to turn Israel into a fascist dictatorship. One of the main bills that is supposed to pass next week or the week after is a law that's going to ban us from participating in the elections. That means that the vast majority of Palestinian citizens in Israel will officially be entitled legally to vote, but won't have anyone to vote for. So everything is part of the same master plan. That is the decisive plan. That means that the one who actually dictates the agenda in Israel, at least in the last year, if not more, is primarily those thugs like Smotrich and Ben Gvir. But of course, Netanyahu is interested in that. It's not that he has any problem with that, with those plans. He didn't initiate the plan, but he does indeed follow and realizes the plan.
Now, we're going to speak about a bunch of things and get into this plan a bit more, especially with how it's being implemented in detail in Gaza with the general's plan, with the evacuation of the north. We'll also, at some point, speak about how Trump coming into the White House probably changes the algorithm a lot in the favor of what you call these right-wing thugs and fascists. But let's just go back to when you joined the Knesset, which was 2019, right? This is 2 years after the publishing of Smotrich's subjugation plan. Did you think when you joined the Knesset that at any point, in the next decade, this plan would come to what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing sort of its violent implementation would come to pass in any way?
No. I was never very, trust. I didn't trust, neither of those governments that I've seen in the last 6 years, almost 6 years since I was first elected, when I could, predict or think that they were going to do malicious things for sure. As the occupation goes on, more than 60 years, it's quite clear that, almost 60 years, sorry. So it's quite clear, but to that level, to that extent, I could never imagine. That's one of the reasons that I'm so ashamed, because if I thought about it before, perhaps I could prepare myself and will not be as ashamed as as I am. But no, I couldn't think that it was going to to get into such a terrible, level, extent of carnage. Never ever.
If you go back 13 and a half months ago, and when the first 4 or 5 days of the reaction from Israel to what happened on October 7th, in those first 5 days already, the death toll was about 7,000. There was massive bombings, lots of killings. Did you think then that we'll still be talking about this 13 and a half months later and we'd be in the situation?
No, because, and I tell you why I didn't think so. I mean, as I said, I didn't have any trust, and obviously I don't have now of this fascist government, the thugs who sit there, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu himself, the Likud itself, which as opposed to what it was before, it was never my cup of tea. I always, have had profound disagreements with the Likud, but the Likud at least had the pretension to be, to some extent, liberal. Now it's totally abolished. The Likud and members of the Knesset with the Likud, most of them are much closer ideologically and politically to Ben Gvir. And this is because Netanyahu wanted them there. It's not something against Netanyahu. It's the choice of Netanyahu. So the Likud actually consists of basically of Kahanist, which is a racist and fascist stance. The Likud is there. Now, but still, I thought, and I was wrong. I am ashamed to say that I was wrong, because I did trust the international community. I'm not talking about the American administration. The United States has proved time and time again, especially in the second half of the 20th century, that it doesn't care a bit for human rights, for democracy. It's always been supporting, vicious, murderous regimes, especially during the Cold War, regimes that were so vicious and murderous, like in Latin America, in East Asia, in anywhere. The United States always supported the most vicious and murderous and oppressive regimes in the world, including, by the way, you know it better than me, apartheid South Africa. The United States supported them. So I had no expectations from the United States. I did have expectations from other countries, especially in Europe. I mean, Europe, so many states in Europe, including the United Kingdom, suffered from occupation. Or not the United Kingdom, but the United Kingdom was bombarded in the Second World War. The Britons know what it means to be under attack. Most of the countries in Western Europe were occupied by Germany. Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, the Czech Republic, or then Czechoslovakia, and so many others, Poland. They know what it means to live under duress, under oppression, under occupation. I would expect them, because of their history, first of all, I would expect anyone as human beings. But if I rule it out for a second, at least I expected that those who suffered historically from terrible oppression, including assassinations, to express any kind of resentment and grudge against the perpetrators, which is Israel. That doesn't undermine the crimes committed by Hamas. I have to repeat it. For not for 1 second. But still, there's a genocide going on for over a year. How can you just, shut up? How can you be so silent? So I was then, I wasn't that, cynic. So I didn't think that someone could be so cynic. And I thought that although the government of Israel didn't care about the lives of anyone, by the way, neither of the Israelis, look what's going on with the hostages that are sacrificed by the Israeli government, forgotten by the Israeli government. their families are attacked physically by the Israeli government and their proxies. So I was in shock that the international community up till now hasn't done anything to really stop this carnage, which is in the interest of the Palestinians, but also of the Israelis. Not only for security reasons, which is part of it, but also because, in my view, the real interest of Israel and the Israelis is to be a just society. You cannot be a just society when you occupy and kill, obviously. By the way, one sentence in regard to the United States. As I said before, I've had no expectations from the United States, but I still couldn't believe that Biden and his administration would be or would go that far to support by arming Israel, by veto decisions of the Security Council. Even like 2 days ago or yesterday, I don't remember, when they vetoed the decision on ceasefire. So with all my reservations from American imperialism and no expectations I had from the United States, I still was a bit, astonished that they went so far and to that extreme of actually supporting materially and diplomatically the genocide of Israel.
I think what you've just said there resonates with a lot of people, and it kind of, we all know about US imperialism and how destructive it's been for the last 80 years and maybe even before that. But almost throughout, since Oslo and even preceding that, every administration, Republican or Democratic, used a carrot and a stick approach to their ally Israel, who was clearly their ally, who they clearly backed, who they gave arms and weapons and leeway to, and who they protected at the UN. And it does seem like this literally in this last year where Israel has behaved in the most grotesque way that it's ever behaved in terms of the atrocities it's committed, where it's just given it complete leeway. And I think it's gotten everyone off guard. And I think it even got Netanyahu off guard. And I think even they are surprised. And this is why you are now seeing, Trump is picking people in his administration who are saying things that Smotrich and Ben Gvir says. We will take the West Bank. We will finish them. We will complete the mission. We will complete this thing and I just think it's not.
According to the coming, defense secretary of defense, they are not going to wash their hands afterwards.
Yeah, no, it seems now that, I think Netanyahu, the way he's conducted the war is to try to test as much as he can the patience of the U.S. administration, how much he can do, and I think now it's almost flipped. Now it's almost like he has carte blanche. And I don't mean to say that Biden was holding him back in any kind of way. He totally wasn't. He was giving him the most destructive bombs that you can use outside of nuclear weapons, that you can use on a civilian population. But it just, now, given what you've just said about the subjugation plan, about the fact that Trump is coming into power, there's a big, I don't think it's a red herring or a big thing anymore because, frankly, there is no disregard for international law. But I do think symbolically the ICC putting out arrest warrants for Netanyahu is significant. How do you see the scaling back of this war occurring?
First of all, as to the ICC, the arrest warrants, too little and too late. So, the time passed since they were supposed to issue those warrants is quite long, and I'm sure that the Americans and the others, just behind the scene, tried to do things to prevent it, or at least to minimize it. And you could see now that the diplomats and politicians in the United States from both parties already said that perhaps even they are going, if they can, to sanction the ICC in order to prevent it or to retaliate ICC because of that, which is unbearable, of course. So it is too late. It is too little because, in my view, there must be more who should be arrested and interrogated for war crimes in Israel. And again, that doesn't exclude the fact that Hamas people also, who are suspect in being involved in the carnage of October 7th, they also must be, arrested, interrogated. But that doesn't exclude the role of Netanyahu, Gantz, and others in the carnage that Israel is responsible for. And so I welcome the decision of ICC, although it was, as I said, too little and too late. I welcome it. And again, I've probably you heard, read, or watched too, the reactions of the so-called opposition in Israel. Then you can understand why Netanyahu is actually has been doing whatever he wants because there is no opposition.
Tell us about the reaction. I read a bit, but I mean, I think you are much more informed. And
first of all, three main figures of the opposition: the chair of the opposition, Yair Lapid, who leads the largest opposition party in the parliament, and Benjamin Gantz, who's supposed to be the alternative to Netanyahu, and according to the polls, is the one who can, succeed Netanyahu as a prime minister. And even Yair Golan, who used to be a member of the Knesset with Meretz, the so-called leftist Zionist, party, and now is heading is the head of a new party which consists of Labour and Meretz together. It is called the Democrats, ironically. The three of them, all of them, each one of them in different, language, perhaps different emphasis, but all of them went against the decision of ICC and referred to it as if it was anti-Semite. I mean, that's unbelievable. Those are supposed to be the alternative to Netanyahu. Not only that they support continuously the genocide and atrocities and the crimes of the occupation, and including the crimes in Lebanon. 40 villages were wiped out of earth in Lebanon, in South Lebanon. 40 villages. Let's not forget Lebanon. Not only that they've been supporting that, now they stand with Netanyahu and joins forces with Netanyahu against ICC. Why? Netanyahu, Gallant, and others are more important than international law and other human beings, including presidents, prime ministers, ministers around the globe? No. No one is above the international law. No one is above humane justice. No one. And if you accuse the ICC, if one accuses the ICC in being anti-Semite, that one, whoever he is or she is, undermines the very existence of international law that began to formalize, began to materialize following the Jewish Holocaust. So what they are doing actually is they are undermining the very institution that to a great extent, I do not say only, but to a great extent, is the byproduct of the crimes the Nazis committed. Is a byproduct of the Holocaust. The victims, the main victims of the Holocaust, who are to some extent responsible for the creation of international law and institutions like ICC, now undermine the very same institution. That shows to what abyss Israel has been deteriorating to. That's, again, shame, pain, rage.
You mentioned Israel is descending into abyss. My next question was going to be, how is this? I mean, we've seen the opposition, how they've reacted. How is society reacting? I mean, I'm guessing it's not discussed. Is it surprise?
The society in Israel, you mean?
Yes.
First of all, I haven't seen too much reaction. It was published yesterday, so there's not enough time. And I'm here in London and haven't got enough time, to read all the... I've read articles, etc., but not really comments by the public. I guess that because of the opposition, because those three figures I mentioned, I mean, we Hadash, which perhaps I have to explain what Hadash is. Should. Hadash stands for a Democratic Front for Peace and Equality. It is based on the Communist Party of Israel and some other leftist factions. It's been the one and only real Jewish Palestinian political parliamentary, movement. We are together Jews and Palestinian citizens of Israel. We are the only ones.
Give us a sense of how much of the Knesset how many seats you have.
There's one house in the Israeli politics, first and foremost, and the Knesset has 120. At the moment, we have 5 members, 4 of Hadash, plus another one from Ta'al party. We formed the coalition before the elections. And so basically, we are the only consistent opposition to the policy of the government. 5 out of 120.
When you say the policy, you mean the policy of carrying out this war? or which policies?
Also, not only that, the policy in general, we are dealing with a fascist. As I said before, it's a full-blooded fascist government. So we've been the only consistent and, opposition to the government, whether, especially, of course, because in the last year, or more than a year, the main thing is the genocide and other atrocities and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and Lebanon.
So you're saying no other MPs besides the 5 of you have spoken out against this war? Like not like we need to maybe bring the hostages back, but fully let's stop the war. What are we doing?
We are the only ones who since day one talked about
not one other MP has said that.
No. In the recent months, there are some other members of the Knesset with the Islamic movement who also talk against the war. But apart from us and them, together we have 10 members of the Knesset. Nobody does. And by the way, some of the complaints that were filed against me to the ethics committee and played a role in my suspension were filed by members of the opposition, of the so-called liberal opposition.
Okay, so when you say liberal, you mean Lapid and Gantz and these guys? Okay.
Yeah. So some of the complaints, as I said, filed against me by members of Gantz and Lapid. One of them, for Lapid's party, filed against me a complaint because I was talking against sorry for saying that so bluntly and directly, the sodomizing of a Palestinian detainee. I was on the podium talking against the soldiers who sodomized or were suspects in sodomizing a Palestinian detainee. And this member of the Knesset with Lapid filed a complaint against me as if I smeared the Israeli soldiers. Everybody knows I was speaking the truth. Such an incident did occur, and there is some evidence that more than once. So, but this is one example. So, as I began to say in regard to the ICC warrants, Hadash issued yesterday a public statement, and which I totally endorse, obviously, that we welcome the decision of ICC because war criminals or suspects in war criminals, to be more accurate as far as the judicial procedure is concerned, those who are suspects in war crimes, whoever they are, I don't care if they're Israelis or Palestinians or French or British or Argentinians. There's a international law. There's what I consider to be humane justice, and anyone who breaches those or violates those must be arrested and interrogated. The reason that they are, the fact that they are Israelis, and I happen to be an Israeli in general and a member of the parliament in particular, doesn't exclude them, doesn't give them a privilege that others don't have.
You mentioned that recently Islamic Party, I think that's what you said? The Islam Party?
Faction, yeah.
Okay, so their faction. So just tell me about them. And it sounds if they're Islam, they're Muslim, right?
Yeah.
And they're probably Palestinian.
Yeah.
So what took them so long to join you and call out the war?
They have, first of all, I'm not the one to ask,
Yes.
because I really am not familiar with what's going on in closed doors. But their emphasis is slightly different from ours. They look at the situation, generally speaking, I'm not talking now about the genocide, in a different way. One of our, main issues in the agenda is the national Palestinian struggle for liberation, for independence, etc. And they've been dealing less with the national issue, generally speaking, with no connection to the genocide. But this is up to them to answer that question. I wouldn't take that.
And they comprise also, what's their composition in the Knesset?
They have 5 seats too.
5. So with you and them, there's 10.
Yeah.
The Hadash and Islam Party. Okay. I want to hone in. I remember us speaking, it was in May. And at the time, the big question, it was kind of hanging over everyone's heads, everyone who's following the genocide in Gaza. It was happening for about 3 weeks. The question was, will Israel do a full-blown operation in Rafah? And it was taking a while, and eventually they did. It was possibly not even I wouldn't have assumed then that this war is going to end anytime soon. I realized that there's Israelis, the troops are in Gaza, and they're probably going to be there for a while. They're going to continue with evictions in the West Bank, and there's going to be continuous sort of exchange of missiles and rocket fire in Lebanon. But even then, the extent that they've gone and attacked Lebanon was inconceivable. And polling suggests that Israelis are much more supportive of Israel's war in Lebanon than they even are in, the war in Gaza. How did it get here?
Well, as I said before, you're totally right. I thought that they weren't do that because of international pressure, but I was wrong because, as I said before, one of the things that I've been in shock and disgust, I must say, is that the international community and especially Biden's administration haven't done anything to prevent the deterioration.
Specifically, though, about Israeli society, that they are so supportive of what are clearly atrocities.
Look, I think that hatred and fear is the wind beneath the right wing. And Netanyahu, like most dictators and fascists, is expert in manipulating the public discourse and opinion. Is expert in abusing and the objective circumstances for his own benefit. And so that's what he's been doing. Of course, is surrounded, as I mentioned before, by his choice, with people who are messianic, bigots, and opportunistics as well. So they will follow him if they think that may pave the way to their own career. And that's what's been happening. It's a terrible cynicism, criminal cynicism, but that's what's going on there. Now, because of that, he succeeded in influencing the vast majority of the Israelis throughout the last year, especially because the people, were outraged and were, afraid and seek revenge after October 7th, and he manipulated it. And by the way, I don't know if you are aware to what's going on now with an investigation regarding people who have been working with Netanyahu in his office. Just to tell those who watch us, the viewers, it was revealed a few months ago. I don't remember when exactly it was. It was published in the Israeli news that the secret documents by Hamas were found in tunnels in Gaza, or in Gaza Strip, which indicated that Sinwar, then the leader of Hamas, planned to pass the border with Egypt through the Rafah corridor with the hostages. And that was used by Netanyahu and his government, first, to explain why they should stay on a Rafah corridor instead of making a deal to release the hostages. And secondly, to attack the families of the hostages, because one of the things that were apparently found on those documents is that Sinwar celebrated the demonstrations initiated by the families of the hostages. And Netanyahu used it to influence the public discourse and public opinion to oppose the Israeli military from leaving Rafah corridor, and also to have a grudge against the families, or the poor families of the hostages. Recently, it was found that first, those documents were top secret, were actually stolen by apparently soldiers who were associated with Netanyahu. That's the suspicion. It has to be proved. That's the suspicion. And they were forged by Netanyahu's collaborators in his office to claim that Sinwar, as I said, wanted to take hostages to Iran via Philadelphia corridor, and use it against the families of the hostages and against the deal to release them. All of this is by now under investigation. It's a suspicion. But that shows you, I assume it is that is true. That shows you that Netanyahu, as a person, and obviously his collaborators and allies, do not care even about the lives of the hostages. Because they forged the document, apparently, according to the suspicion. They forged those documents in order to, as I said, justify the continuation of the genocide and opposition to the release of the hostages who are dying in agony there. I lost a friend there, who was shot dead by Hamas after he was kidnapped. And another friend in the beginning that I said on October 7 itself. But it's not a personal, it's an ideological and moral opinion or view. So he and his allies to use and apparently forge those documents in order to block a deal that would have liberated the hostages. They block any possibility of ending the war in order to stop also the genocide, and they smeared the families of the hostages. That's the suspicion which I believe does have basis. That shows exactly how Netanyahu, as a psychopath, villain, and his malicious companions have been manipulating the public opinion in Israel. Still, the vast majority of the Israeli citizens, Jews, Palestinians, and others, oppose the government, don't want the government. Some of them still don't oppose the genocide. Some do oppose the genocide, but not necessarily for the same reasons that we are.
What's their reasons for opposing the genocide?
Some of those who call to end the genocide or the war and get out of Gaza do so in order to release the hostages, full stop. We do so in order indeed to release the hostages. We want them back home, but also because we consider the genocide as a crime in itself that should be stopped.
So the question that I want to pose is, I mean, it's clear that Netanyahu is a bad guy, and it's very clear that you are anti-Netanyahu. And I think there's many. I mean, there's even talk and video that even the U.S. administration who have not been happy with Netanyahu. Obama had a very strained relationship with Netanyahu, always while giving him bombs. So that must be said.
Yeah.
But I mean,
there is a sort of dissonance here.
There's a dissonance there, right? But you've just said that there's 120 MPs. Hadash were against the war. They've been against the war from the start. So there's now 5 Palestinian from the Palestinian Party, Islam Party, that are now also against the war, right? So if Lapid or Gantz or anyone else takes over, is there really some change that occurs, or it's just maybe in the rhetoric or the intensity or the sort of the brazenness that they would act? Like, I mean, what's to stop them in terms of, obviously not in terms of judicial reform, but in terms of trying to actually broker some sort of, I'm not even going to say a just solution anymore, just some sort of solution where Israel isn't completely dominating the Palestinians as much as they want to?
Look, in the long run, there must be a Palestinian liberation. The Palestinian people is entitled to its own statehood, full stop. It's not under, any kind of skepticism or any doubt. The Palestinian people is and will enjoy their statehood in their own sovereign Palestinian independent state in the old territories Israel occupied in 1967. Including East Jerusalem, of course. That will happen. The question is how much blood and lives are going to be lost before that. But that will happen.
What makes you so confident that it will happen?
Because
I think most people watching this would want it to happen and are hoping for it, just to be clear. But I mean, given how we've seen the situation deteriorate, not just in the last year, but how we've seen it deteriorate over 6 decades, what makes you so sure?
Because now more people begin to understand across the globe. We can see demonstrations of peoples all over the world. The problem is not with the peoples. It's not, for example, with the people of England. It's with the government and governments. And I think that more and more people begin to understand. Some understood it ages ago. Within Israel as well, I think that will change. Not tomorrow, not next week, but that will change because there is no other choice. Look, Israel is on the verge of a collapse. I put it aside for a second, the questions of justice, which obviously
the first question is actually about why would Gantz and Lapid and these guys be significantly better than Netanyahu, and then we can address justice, but also then we can address what you just mentioned.
Look, I have no expectations from Lapid and Gantz. Let's begin with Gantz. Gantz paved the way to the continuation of Netanyahu's government. I mean, he joined Netanyahu when he was first elected in 2019. I was first elected too then. He had a chance to form an alternative government without the right wing, the extreme right wing, without Netanyahu, and he preferred to go with Netanyahu. And now, after the October 7th, after the massacre, He, again, later on joined the so-called emergency government with Netanyahu. He's been legitimizing Netanyahu, especially when Netanyahu had to be delegitimized and even, demonized, because he is a demon, by the way.
Why do you think he does it?
Because he's a coward.
You think he's a coward, or do you think he also has ideological designs?
I think he has no ideology. I think that some of his party are rightists. Some are not, by the way, and I'm very disappointed with them. Some are rightists. Even some of them voted in favor of my impeachment then. So they didn't vote, apart from one member of the Knesset with Gantz, when there was this bill I mentioned before to ban us from running in the next elections. The whole party, the whole faction of Gantz, apart from one, went out of the plenum and did not oppose it. Yesh Atid did oppose, Lapid did oppose, I must say, in that specific bill. But going back to Gantz, you cannot trust him politically. I think that he has no real ideology. He clings to this empty slogan of Israel before everything. By the way, he said something very foolish, if I may say so, not too long ago. It was quoted by a journalist in Israel. He said something like that. It was in a public meeting. So he said, look, we will always be in the center, because for him, it's not an ideology. It's a ruler. You see what I mean?
It's a practical tool.
It's not even practical.
I mean, it's
a kind of
tool.
It's a stupid worship of something, abstract, which is called center. But in that, look, center, originally, whether I like it or not, doesn't matter. But political center has ideas about the market, about welfare, about relations between religion and politics, about gender, about different things. He doesn't, and they don't. For them, and especially for Gantz, to be in the center is to move with all the other parties in the public. And he said so, actually, literally, explicitly and literally. He said something like that, not something. I'm almost quoting him. He said, if there is an imagined ruler with the numbers 1 to 6, we always are going to be 3 or 4. So someone asked him, if the whole ruler moves, all the scale moves towards the Kahana ideas, the most fascist, racist ideas, if the whole scale is going to move, so he said, and I quote, we'll move with it. That's not center. That's populism. So Gantz, for me, is out of the question, is not going to pose any alternative. First, because he's been looking for this vague, abstract center which doesn't really exist. Secondly, because he proved time and time again that when the chips are down, he's going to join Netanyahu. Now, what about Lapid? Lapid is not as bad as Gantz. I admit it. He's not as bad as Gantz. He's bad enough, but not as Gantz. But can he, is he the hope we're looking for? Absolutely not. Because he's another coward. He doesn't have the guts to accept difficult and tough decisions. I'll give you an example of someone who did. Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin, the assassinated late prime minister. Obviously, we didn't share his views and values, never. We opposed him. He was the defense minister during the first Intifada, when it was considered brutal. Now it's nothing to compare to, yeah? But he gave the order to break the bones of Palestinians in the first Intifada. I remember it very well because I refused to serve then in the Palestinian territories. I was imprisoned. When Rabin was prime minister, I was when he was defense minister, I was imprisoned 3 times. So I remember it even, in accordance with my personal experience on top of values and politics, etc. So, but for one reason or another, doesn't matter now. He did change his mind. He recognized the PLO as the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. He met Arafat. He allowed the PLO and Arafat to get back to the occupied territories. He began a procedure or a process whether we like it or not. I do not refer to the Oslo Accords now themselves. But he was brave enough. He was assassinated for that. But he was brave enough. I remember that Arafat said during that time, we need peace of the brave ones. And it's true. Now, among the Palestinians, there are some brave ones who can lead the Palestinians towards, on the one hand, Palestinian liberation and just peace. For instance, Marwan Barghouti, who is in prison. I've been in contact with him.
What have you been saying?
But
when you're in contact with him, so what's
no, I cannot meet him. It's forbidden.
Okay,
I'm not allowed. But I just got a message from him. I sent a message to him from him. I sent a message to him. He supports the two-state solution. He can unite the Palestinian people, Gaza, West Bank, Hamas, Fatah, left. He has the power to do so. He could be the Nelson Mandela of the Palestinians. So there is a brave figure. There are perhaps other figures, but that's just one example, a very prominent one. There are others who are mentioned. That's not my business. I'm not a Palestinian. It's them to decide. But I just gave an example of one option, a realistic one. In Israel, there are either bigots, fanatics, sometimes murderous ones. Some of them we mentioned before, and they are cowards. And unfortunately, there's no real brave figure now I can see that could lead the Israeli society together with Palestinian prominent political figures towards a just peace. And Lapid is part of the problem, not of the solution. By the way, within his own faction, there are some who are rightists. They have 24 members of the Knesset, 7 of them voted in favor of my impeachment. The others went out of the plenum, didn't dare to vote against, although they knew, they said so, that the attempts to impeach me were unlawful. They were unlawful. You need not accept or agree with me, but you cannot just vote to impeach another member of the parliament simply because you do not agree with him or her. When the legal counselors of both the Knesset and the government said very clearly, even sharply, that the attempt to impeach me was unlawful. Still, Lapid himself as a person and his party, majority of his party, were too afraid to vote against the impeachment because they were afraid that the public would accuse them in being pro-Arabs, leftists. And 7 of them, as I said, out of 24 even voted in support of my impeachment. So the hope is not coming from them. I'm still hopeful because I'm sure that real leaders, brave leaders, will emerge soon because there's no other choice.
Okay, I want to touch on this idea of brave leaders, right? I do agree with you that it takes brave people to compromise. And as you know, I'm South African, and so we have experience into this, right? But when I look at when the South African government, the apartheid regime, when they started negotiating with Nelson Mandela and members of the ANC secretly, and then, it was a long process of a 7-year negotiation before they had the first elections in 1994. But it wasn't just bravery. They were sanctioned. South Africa, the white population of South Africa is 15%. Now it's even less, but back then it was 15% of the country. The sanctions were being fully imposed on South Africa. The US had started to isolate South Africa. They couldn't trade. They were blocked from sports. It was very much also a practical decision, right? With Rabin, it's kind of similar. After the first Intifada, there was a lot of pressure brought to bear on the Israeli government. It's almost for the first time. You can say that the 82 Lebanon war was also quite grotesque, and it was a lot of media about that, but that was about Lebanon. It wasn't about the actual occupied territories. And there was a lot of pressure, right? So you can see that while it takes brave men, there's this entire ecosystem that needs to function. And the Oslo Accords also happened in the shade of, the Berlin Wall falling, the Cold War coming to an end, and South Africa being free. So it was kind of like the mood of the moment. And maybe that was also in Rabin's mind, there's this change coming along. It now just seems, and I hear what you're saying, that they're all bigots and they're all cowards and the public is against it. And we see that. We look at this and we see the public are.
The public is very dynamic, it might change in one day.
You're
Actually,
right.
actually, the Oslo Accords, and by the way, it were better for South Africa. The attitude among the whites one
Yeah, I
changed
mean,
relatively rapidly.
it changed rapidly. We were kind of it changed because of, many reasons. One of them is the
Economic sanctions as well, sure.
economic sections, and it was weird how Mandela was also as a person just able to win the public, because there was, I remember having conversations. I was still a very young person, but people were very concerned when the first free elections were going to come. None blacks.
I know. I was
They
in
were very
Johannesburg.
concerned. They thought people were stacking up on food and all kinds of things, and all of their fears were complete paranoia. But that's really through exceptionally skillful management of perception and a bunch of things, and real magnanimity by Mandela. But that's besides the point. The real point is Israel is armed to the teeth, right? The Palestinian, I wouldn't just say that there's no leadership. I would argue that their leadership has been fractured deliberately and been killed deliberately and been paralyzed deliberately by Israel.
Absolutely, that's part of the problem. Sure,
absolutely,
sure.
Right. There's this hugely powerful nation on earth called the USA that is sort of using the ideology of white supremacy prevalent in the north, which is buffering up Israel. And now we're about to get. And honestly, I don't know, because Biden was really, really bad. But you're about to get a bunch of people that are going to surround the next president of the USA, who are basically as fascistic on the issue, and they're not. It's not just the issue, as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, right? So it just seems like it needs a lot more than bravery. Just like how do you even begin drawing this back? And the other thing is that. And it's kind of changing now, at least rhetorically. But South Africa was embraced. The South African struggle against apartheid was embraced by the African continent. The African neighbors to South Africa played ball with not with the apartheid regime, but with the struggle, with the ANC and the underground movement. The same is not happening in the Arab world. So the Palestinian cause, to a large extent, is isolated. How? Like it's just whole new. It's an entirely different algorithm we're dealing with.
First of all, you are totally right. There are resemblances, but the differences are larger. When I didn't say that bravery is enough, it's not sufficient, but it is a must. But we do need the circumstances, of course, and the conditions that would allow that bravery to emerge and to come to the fore. So we do need a combination of two. Now, it is true that we are facing now, so it seems, a really lunatic administration under Trump. I'm looking at those figures. If he's been, nominating, it's terrible. It's not only that they are fanatics and bigots and fascists and racists, but they are truly, some of them, are truly insane. Truly insane. That, Huckabee. And the ambassador to the coming ambassador to Israel, who thinks that Israel must be like the biblical, so to speak, promised land. Those are crazy, absolutely. But that's why I said before that I was disappointed less from the United States, but from the international community. And I hope that the arrest warrants first will be respected by the 124 countries that are supposed to respect it, including the UK, because there's a contradiction between something I heard an hour ago and something that the Home Secretary said yesterday. The Home Secretary
Tell us about the contradiction.
The Home Secretary said yesterday or today morning that England does not undertake to respect the decision. But I've been told by in a meeting I had before I came here, with Jeremy Corbyn and some other friends, that the government, I don't know who in the name of the government, but the government said that it will respect the arrest warrants issued by the ICC. I don't know. I hope definitely that they will. That's a game changer, because if the vast majority of the so-called democratic Western states do respect the arrest warrants, and accordingly, because of that, Netanyahu is going to be limited in his movement across the globe. He cannot address, for instance, the United Nations, for instance. He won't be able to visit France, okay? That may lead to a change. Not tomorrow. I do not delude myself or anyone else. That won't happen tomorrow, but look, I know Netanyahu. No, he's not, of course, he's not my friend. Thank you very much. But And I had very few, conversations with him, perhaps 2 or 3, not more than that, and not long ones, apart from one. But I think that I know him enough to know that he's basically, along with his megalomania and psychopathy, is a coward. He's now under a terrible stress, I assure you. He's under a terrible, terrible stress. He's frightened guts. And that may change his behavior. This is one thing. The other thing is that if on top of that, more people are going to be against more people, warrants like those are going to be issued. Politicians and others, generals, that may really influence what's going on. For sure, in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of fuss, anti-Semites, the whole world is against us, we are the eternal victims. For sure, it's going to be there more and more, including, as I said before, by most of the opposition. But I believe that won't, stay there, will not, prevail for good. And I think that will change and may upset the apple cart, within Israel too, and lead to different decisions. Now, I'm not a prophet. I'm not saying that I'm sure about it. Perhaps I'm totally wrong. I was wrong. You mentioned before something I was wrong about. Yes.
I think all of us have been wrong in this last year.
Look, if I wasn't wrong, I wasn't. The philosopher Aristotle said that only beasts and gods are not to, I never do wrong. Actually, gods in the Greek mythology do, but never mind. But he said so, at least. So I'm not I'm not a saint. I'm not an angel. I'm not a god. I hope I'm not a beast. At least not when I'm not eating. And so I may be wrong. But one thing I'm sure about, and I'm not wrong about, the struggle continues. With all the persecution we've been facing, people have been in Israel under a terrible persecution, arrested, beaten, fired from their workplaces, and their colleges and universities thrown out of them because of tweets and posts against the genocide. I've been suspended, as we know. There is this bill that intends to ban us in the future from participating in the elections. The situation is dire. I'm not saying it's not. Obviously it is, and it's going to be worse. I'm afraid of almost a civil war in Israel. I'm pretty sure that we are going to see, a lot of blood in the streets of Israel, initiated by fascist militias, armed fascist militias, who already exist and just wait for an order from Ben Gvir or Netanyahu or someone else in their gang. So the situation is very grave. But we'll never surrender. I mean, if I quote Churchill for a second, we shall never surrender.
Tell me more about the resistance inside of Israel, these people tweeting and protesting and getting beaten by police. How strong is it? How organized is it? And can it sustain itself?
I'll begin with something very optimistic, I must say. We, Hadash, which I explained what it is, we succeeded in organizing more than 60 human rights, anti-occupation, anti-genocide, etc. Organizations into one kind of, not exactly a movement, a coalition. When we've been doing many things together in resistance to the genocide and to the atrocities, calling also, it's very important to say that again, for the release of the Israeli hostages, etc., etc. We've been launching demonstrations and in the meetings. One thing that we already did 3 or 4 times, I think, was meetings for evidences. That is to say that both Palestinians from Gaza, or the relatives, and Israelis sat together by video sometimes, if there was no possibility for people from Gaza or the relatives to attend it physically, when they just share their experiences, both Israelis and Palestinians that lost their loved ones in the genocide and in the massacre before of Hamas. So that is part of the resistance which grows stronger and wider. It includes families of hostages, families of people who were killed, etc. So that's very, very strong and very forceful and very successful. There are demonstrations every Saturday, throughout the country, sometimes in the middle of the week too. And those are not exactly organized because there are many groups. They are organized, but there are different groups and different blocks. So there is the anti-genocide and anti-occupation bloc, which we are obviously a part of. And they participate in Jerusalem, in Haifa, the north of Israel, in Tel Aviv. There are blocks against the genocide and the occupation, which we are part of. It's quite strong. It's quite vocal. We are heard. We are seen. There are some other groups, that deal less with the genocide and more with the hostages. The families of the hostages are themselves, it's not one bloc. The majority of them are calling to stop the war, either because they worried, and justly so, to the young ones, to the loved ones, but also because they oppose, morally the genocide. There are families of the hostages who are there, and they are with us. So that resistance exists. But, and there's also, of course, even more so, resistance in the social network. In the media, unfortunately, apart from the newspaper Haaretz, the media as a whole is totally with the genocide. Less or more, but you can hardly hear or watch or read journalists in Israel who are explicitly and vocally against the genocide. So in that sense, the media is totally conquered, I can say, apart from few individuals. But again, that struggle of ours continues. Our resistance to the atrocities, to the bloodshed, to the destruction of everybody, Lebanese, Palestinians, and Israelis, continues and will continue. Now, there is a political persecution in Israel. That's part of turning Israel into as I said before, a full-fledged fascist dictatorship. There are many examples. First of all, the police doesn't exist anymore. There is no police. Officially, formally, there is. In practice, the police has long ago turned into a private militia in the hands of Ben Gvir, the fascist national security minister, and the government as a whole. So on the one hand, they do not prevent violence by fascists against Palestinians or even against Israelis. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, every demonstration, the police beats and arrests demonstrators, peaceful ones, against the genocide, including families of the hostages. Every demonstration, it happens again and again and again. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, because people are arrested for posts and tweets. And I give you one example, two examples. One example, and there are more. A Palestinian citizen in Israel, from the north of Israel, a Palestinian teacher, she posted her dancing on TikTok. Accidentally, it was on the 7th of October. She immediately was arrested from her home, accused in celebrating the massacre, which was totally nonsense. I know her I knew her after, but I know who she is. I visited her. She's far from being a Hamas supporter or something like that. Exactly the opposite. She was arrested, humiliated. She was handcuffed, and her eyes were, blindfolded. And there are thousands of similar examples. But it's not only for posts and tweets. The teachers at school, professors, university, students, if they express one way or another, it may be a social network, but even if they speak in class against the atrocities in Gaza, they may be fired. Now there's a law. I shall refer to this law in a second. Not a bill, a law that already passed. But professors and teachers and MDs, doctors and nurses at hospital, if someone of their colleagues heard them saying something against the genocide in Gaza and told it to the authorities, they were immediately arrested or fired. And there are so many examples. So there is an ongoing, not only persecution, but atmosphere of terror against Israeli citizens who want to raise an alternative voice, who want to raise a voice against the genocide and against the bloodshed. It is now literally dangerous to do it in Israel. People are viciously attacked, violently attacked, sometimes physically, sometimes economically, so to speak. They are thrown away from their studies or workplaces, lose their jobs, arrested, humiliated. And my suspension is just part of it. It doesn't stand in itself. This is a part of a tsunami, of a fascist tsunami of persecution. So that's what's going on now in Israel. And those governments who support the government of Israel do not support the people of Israel. Exactly the opposite. They must understand, once they support the Israeli government, they act not only against the Palestinians, but also against the Israelis. Because the government of Israel now persecutes the Israelis. The government of Israel is now the enemy number one of the Israelis. So you want to support the Israelis, don't support the government of Israel.
I know that you have to run to. I mean, you are a parliamentarian who's suspended, but you need to run to Westminster, I guess, to speak to people in the Foreign Office, and you're just here in for a few days. So we'll start wrapping it up. But I just have a few more questions, and it's about the sustainability of Israel. And I mean, we spoke a lot about internal sustainability, but just in how Israel is going to be able to eventually, possibly live. And I mean, and I want to use the word normal. Because normalization is thrown around, but I don't mean it in the context of normalization. I maybe do as well, but it's just how is after there was already a very contentious relationship that Israel had with its neighbors, even though its neighbors who are Arab aren't exactly with the Palestinian cause, right? But there was a contentious relationship just because of the history. Post the genocide, when it ends, how it ends, and we're not sure. It may be much worse. It may be after half the West Bank is emptied. There may be a real ethnic cleansing. We're not sure if South Lebanon will eventually have autonomy again. It doesn't have autonomy right now. It's occupied. So we don't know what that looks like. But how, after that, is some sort of normal relations going to be possible?
I go back to what I said before in regard to people versus government. I think that the Arab peoples in general, across the Arab world, do support the Palestinian cause, do support the liberation of the Palestinians, not at the expense of the Israelis. I believe they are also, but I believe that the majority do support Palestinian liberation and do support the Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. That's my and my comrades' opinion, the two-state solution. I think the problem is with the governments. The governments in some Arab states do not support the Palestinians. And they cooperate and collaborate with the Israeli government at the expense of the Palestinians. I would expect them, just like I said before, in regard to the international community in general, to be more attentive and to support the Palestinian liberation and peace with just peace with the state of Israel. If they support the Palestinians by, pressing more on the Israeli government, either directly or indirectly, for instance, by putting more pressure on other states like the United States, they can help the Palestinians. And as I said, this will be also helpful for the Israelis, because you must understand, I do not see the interest of the Palestinians and the interest of the Israelis as a zero-sum game. That is to say that if one side wins, the other necessarily loses. No. I see the situation as a win-win situation or a lose-lose situation. Either both Israelis and Palestinians win by liberating the Palestinians from the vicious occupation and, of course, ending the genocide, etc. And that would, in my view, also liberate, with all the differences, of course, the Israelis from the weight of the occupation and the moral bankruptcy, and not only moral bankruptcy, economic as well. We shall see it soon. That's part of why I am hopeful, because in the end, the economy of Israel is going to collapse. That will change the attitude among Israelis. But that I just leave aside for a second. Or not for more second, than a second. And So it's a win-win because both sides can win if the Palestinians are liberated, enjoy their rights, enjoy their freedom, enjoy their statehood, etc. So the Israelis are going to be liberated. And the Israeli society will flourish only if the occupation ends. As long as the occupation goes on top of its being, malicious and murderous and criminal, it also harms the Israeli society. And if I had the time, I could explain from a more socialist point of view. But it's either this a win-win situation or a lose-lose, where both Palestinians and Israelis are going to perish, are going to pay a terrible price for the atrocities. Mainly the Palestinians because they are the victims, but the Israelis are going to pay the price too. Because for sure, it may happen in 1 year or 5 years, but it will erupt and explode.
What will erupt and explode?
The situation of the occupation, the aftermath of the genocide. You think that the Israelis are not going to pay a very expensive price? It's not that I, wanted that to happen. I just analyze the situation and assume that it will happen because I know a bit something about history. So it's either a win-win or a lose-lose. I want to, with my comrades, of course, we want the win-win situation to prevail. So because of that, we shall never surrender, as I said before. But we do need, as I said, the international community on our side, including those governments of the Arab states. I do not say break those who do have, break the relations with Israel for good. I do say use those relations in order to make a change. You can do it. Do that.
Okay. We need to conclude because I know you have to have a meeting. So just one final thing. I would have loved to extend the conversation and speak more about, its sustainability and especially although it's a very grim discussion, what lose-lose looks like, because I do feel that maybe to some extent we may be there already, but we can't have that discussion now because it's going to take a long time. Right. So just the final discussion. We've spent a large part of the last possibly an hour and a half speaking about the bad things you've seen in Israeli society and how upset and angry you are. On the other side, we see Palestinians. We see fathers looking after their kids. We see thousands of children without limbs now. We see mothers, putting their kids to bed, not knowing what's going to happen. And honestly, we see lines of men and women lined up, being carted away. And a lot of it is carried with so much dignity. How do you juxtapose that? And just, how do you just juxtapose that with what you're seeing on one side of this country with the other side?
I can hardly find words, The catastrophe that the Palestinians have been going through in Gaza, it's something uncomparable almost to anything in the last decades. And obviously that should end. That should never began. It should have never begun, of course. But now that should end. And look, although there's no comparison as far as numbers are concerned, but the death toll within the Israeli society is also on the rise. There's no one day without, soldiers that are killed in Lebanon or Gaza. And the Israeli society and the Israeli public must also understand that apart from justice, which I explained, my view, and opposing a genocide, the crimes, etc., they must understand that that goes back to the lose-lose win-win, that they are going to keep losing, we are going to keep losing our sons and daughters as long as that, violence continues. So on top of being just to end immediately those atrocities, it's also the interest of those who are seemingly, happy and stable, because nobody is.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I hope you make it to Westminster in time.